Good evening and welcome, everybody. I suppose we can call it Season 1, Episode 2. Once again, to what can be called Episode 2 of the Management Development Program that is focusing on leadership in the 21st century. Thank you all for making the time once again. Good evening, Tabi Singh. Thank you. Like yesterday, we have our two exciting speakers talking to you again. They're ready to wow you. They didn't do any work at all today. They just prepared for this webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about transformational leadership, agile organizations, leading agile organizations, and we'll hopefully unpack the concept of an agile organization, and then the future of work and imagining, or I guess reimagining, the future of work. So without further ado, let me hand over to Kyle, who will take you through the first part of the transformational leadership. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof, for that. And welcome to everyone. Welcome to, as Prof mentioned, episode 2 of this 3-day webinar series hosted by REGENT Business School. My name is Kyle. I'm the HR executive for Autoboys. With me today is my co-presenter, Taffy. And if you are joining us for the first time, welcome and thank you for making time to join this informative session. Once again, please make use of the chat functionality as well as the Q&A. We'll address some of your comments and questions later on during the session, but we would like to make this as interactive as possible. So please do interact with us during those sessions. Let's go through the agenda quickly. As Prof mentioned, we're going to cover 3 modules today. So the first one is conceptualizing transformational leadership. And after that, we're going to look at a case study, which I'll be presenting. And thereafter, I'm going to be handing over to my co-presenter, where we're going to talk about imagining the future of work. You know, yesterday we spoke a little bit about transactional leadership, and we said, what is the difference? So what is transformational leadership? And transformational leadership is really a leadership style in which leaders encourage, inspire, motivate employees, to create change that will help grow and shape the future success of the company. So, this is accomplished by really setting an example by executives, by senior management through a strong sense of corporate culture. And this is done by, creating employee ownership and independence in the workplace. Now, transformational leaders inspire and motivate their workforce without really micromanaging. They trust their employees, they know that they've trained their employees well, and they give them authority really to do their job. And this is a management style that's designed to really give employees more room to be creative, to look at the future and find new solutions to really all problems. So employees on the leadership track will also be prepared to become transformational leaders themselves through this mentorship and training program and the influence they have from the transformational leader. So you'll see we're covering sort of 5 aspects in terms of this, which is really what Bass and Rigo explain in their transformational leadership sort of studies, where they say that transformational leaders are those who stimulate and inspire followers for both to achieve extraordinary outcomes, as well as the process to develop their own leadership capacity. Now, we need to remember that transformational leaders help followers grow and develop into leaders by responding to individual followers' needs and really by empowering and aligning them to the objectives and goals of the individual followers. And this is done through the larger organization. Now, we look at this and we say, well, transformational leadership really, it covers a lot of things, but the 5 that I really like to share is one is molding the way. It's, are you creating that path and that way for the followers to lead? Are you encouraging them? Are you sharing that inspired vision? By sharing that, you're actually enabling them to act, which is also challenging the process. And this is really, really important as a transformational leader to understand that your role to really transform from being transactional to transformational in your leadership style is really focusing on some of these elements. Now, both transactional and transformational leadership are needed. And while transactional leaders really ensure that routine work is done, because that's what really transactional leaders do, I think we were chatting earlier through our preparation, and Robyn made a comment who said, well, transactional leadership is really paying you a salary to get the job done. And while looking at this, transformational leaders really look after initiatives that add value to business. And creating a high performance workforce has become increasingly important. And to do business, leaders must be able to inspire organization and their team by going beyond the day job, by going beyond the regular tasks that they have to do. And we see that as a result of this, new concepts of leadership have emerged, and transformational leadership is really one of them. And in many organizations, both transactional and transformational leadership is needed. I think yesterday we covered a little bit about management and leaders and what is the difference between them, but also what is sort of the things that set them apart, which is also important. And remember that transactional leaders or managers ensure that routine work is done reliably, while transformational leaders look after initiatives that add value to the business. And this is by really sharing expectations and saying, how do I go beyond that expectation? How do I add more? How do I go more? And we know that transactional leaders provide, sort of distinct advantages through, their sort of abilities to address small operations quickly. But at the same time, transactional leaders handle the details that come together, which build strong reputation. Transformational leadership, however, is crucial to the strategic development of the organization. And you'll see what we mean here in the slide in front of you, where we talk about some of the elements of transformational leadership. But we're looking at, how does this pair up with some of the outcomes of transactional leadership to really go beyond and break those boundaries and barriers. What are some of the differences, if we had to look at it, between transactional leadership and transformational leadership, which is what we want to cover just now. But if we look at transactional leadership, we know that this sort of leadership style is responsive. We know that this works with the culture of the organization. And we also tend to understand that employees achieve objectives through rewards and punishments set by the leader. And we'll make some reference to some of the case studies that we looked at yesterday, where there were sort of demerit points when they actually use the bathroom. But at the same time, we need to know that transactional leadership really motivates followers by appealing to their self-interest. So it's more about what that leader is more than what they can give off to their team. And it's management by expectation. So it's maintaining the status quo to say, this is the salary I'm giving to you, this is the job that you're required to perform, and you need to perform it. And sort of intellect, simulation, or motivation is zero. There's nothing really there. It's transactional, as we say. Think of a transaction that you go through. You're purchasing a product, you go up to the till, you give them the money, you buy your product, and you move on. There's no sort of adding value in that. But what transformational leadership does, it means it's proactive. It constantly works to change the culture of the organization while maintaining its vision and mission of the organization. Here we also know that in transformational leadership, employees achieve objectives through ideas and values. And it actually motivates the followers and motivates the employees by encouraging them to actually put the company first, to actually put the interest of the organization first. And if you look in your work sort of context, you'll see that staff members that are highly engaged in sort of their job and with their leadership team will generally not have issues to work overtime or put in the extra effort or go above and beyond, because they are motivated by the organization. They are motivated by their leader. And if you're looking at sort of individualized consideration, is that each behavior is directed to express consideration and support. And I think we spoke a little bit about this yesterday, where we spoke a little bit about empathy. And I think, one of the participants mentioned, when is too much compassion? When do we stop with that? And transformational leadership really creates an environment where they are able to be innovative, they are able to share ideas, and they are able to problem solve unlike a transactional leadership style where you don't have that room for creativity, you don't have that room to sort of share ideas. And sort of, go beyond. And transactional leaderships, they expect, certain things from an employee or from their followers. They set the goal, they give them direction, and that's the output. But with transformational leaders, you see that they actually go above and beyond. They have this inclusive demeanor about them, where they're taking you along on this journey. And it's really important to know that if we want to move over to this, it's about that inclusivity. It's about sharing that direction. It's about sharing the knowledge with your team. And I think, it's about being open and transparent with them. So, how do we do this? And I want to share a video with you. And it really talks about how do we move away from being transactional to transformational. The video is by John C. Maxwell. Many of you have read his books, listened to his videos, and he's really one of the thought-through leaders, when it comes to transformational leadership. Please note that depending on your bandwidth and your internet connection, the video might freeze or you might get disconnected, but we will play the video and you'll be able to hear that.
Making the shift from a trained leader, a leader that basically knows how to lead and follows leadership principles, to a transformational leader is one of the most important and most dynamic shifts that you can ever make in your life. I call it the impact shift. And the reason I call it that is because if you can make this shift, you will see impact multiply and compound like no other shift in my book. Let me define exactly what I mean when I talk about impact shift. I mean, it's moving people to focus more on the why than the how. You see, transformational leaders, they are change agents. It's more than being a trained leader knowing what to do. A transformational leader not only does it, but impacts people. You see, transformational leaders, they influence people by what they say, what they think, how they act. And that change, that transformation that people have, begins to change their lives. It's one thing to take a person from one point to another. A trained leader can do that. It's quite another to be transformational until that person wants to go from one point to another, and their life is truly impacting and truly changing. I have an organization, Equip, and we trained 5 million leaders in every country of the world. And when we finished training those leaders, I looked at my board and said, we're not done. We now want to take those who know how to lead and bring transformation into their life of wanting to lead and help people make that change that will make them truly transformational in their life and in their leadership. Once that happens, huge impact, unbelievable influence. It's a challenge, but you can get there.
So what I'd really like to talk about, is how do we move from being a transactional leader to a transformational leader? And I think, some of the points that he mentioned is, quite important, that it's sort of, we're moving from this sort of leadership style, but it's really about having that impact with the people. It's really about moving people from one place to another, but showing them the why, focusing on the why. And if you read a lot of articles and if you're sort of in academia, you'll understand that human behavior, there's always a why. What's in it for me? I have to do something, but what benefit do I get as it, what's in it for me? And that's generally how humans think. That's just generally how we behave, is if we had to do something, it needs to benefit us. And transformational leadership is really about that. It's really about influencing people. And a key thing to remember is that transformational leadership does not stop. Transformational leadership is an ongoing process where you're continuously influencing people. You are continuously changing the lives of people, because that's what you're doing. You are transforming them. You are no longer transacting with them on certain issues, but you're really making an impact with them. And I'm interested to hear some of your thoughts and comments, on the chat function of some of the impacts you can have by moving from a traditional sort of leadership trait to a transformational leader. And coming back to this, it's really a transformational leader. It's about transforming the mindset of the followers. It's really in a way to sort of share your vision and to adopt the vision of the organization as if it was their own. You want people to embrace this. You want to give them that sense of belonging. And this transformation sort of motivates employees to overcome their own interest and work towards the collective goals. This is the leadership principle that really underpins employee connectedness to organizational goals. This leads us to improved productivity. It leads us to a high performance culture. And to do this, we really need to sort of look at our organization. I was attending a conference, I think last year or the year before in Singapore, and I was listening to one of Thought Through Leaderships that was talking about, leadership, leaders want to be cutting edge. And what really struck me was when she said that if we want to be cutting edge, as leaders, we need to be ready to bleed. And what she meant by that was, if we want to really be transformational, we must be transformational. We must really have the impact we want to have on our people to take them forward. And this concept of transformational leadership was really initially introduced, by a leadership expert. And if some of you will know of him through your studies, was James McGregor Burns. And according to Burns, he says that transformational leadership can be seen where leaders and followers make each other to advance to a higher level of morale and motivation. And that's so important to understand, that that's what you want. You don't want to be a same manager. You don't want to be that same leader. You really want to leave that impact. Another thing, they say is, what stink do you want to leave behind as a leader? When you think of some of the people that you worked with, some of the leaders that impacted your life, what are some of the first sort of thoughts that come into your mind when you think of, that leader, they've transformed me, they've helped me, they've groomed me, they've paved the way for me? And you think of some of those bad leaders that you've had, where you've learned from those experiences, which is so important. I want to touch a little bit now on the 4 dimensions of transformational leadership. And you can find a lot. I think Prof mentioned yesterday, there's over 2 million or 2 billion sort of Google searches on this, and you can find all of these things on Google. But there was 4 that really stuck out to me, which was really influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual and stimulation behavior, and individualized consideration. And if we're really talking about individualized influence, it's so important to know that influence actually refers to the extent to which a leader is engaging in promoting the follower to generate trust to follow them. How do I generate trust with my followers so they know that they can follow me and trust me? And transformational leaders not only challenge the status quo, but they also encourage creativity amongst the people that follow them. And this sort of leader who's in a transformational leadership, they really explore new ways of doing things. They look at new opportunities to learn and better themselves so they can build trust with their team. With that, and coupled with that is really inspirational motivation, because that's what sets you apart as well. It's really about the extent to which you as a leader present a vision to motivate the followers that are following you. And transformational leadership also involves, offering support and encouragement to those individual followers. And in order to sort of foster supportive relationships, transformational leaders keep lines of communication open so that the people that follow them feel free to share their ideas. They feel free to sort of let their leader know, I'm having a problem here. Can you assist me? And, we were talking a little bit about this yesterday, where we have different versions of trust. But what is trust? How do you know you can trust someone or trust something? It's about being consistent over time. And if you are consistent, you know that you've developed that, where they can say, I can trust this person because I've seen their attributes, I've seen their characteristics. And thirdly, we want to talk about, intellectual simulation characterizes, the extent to which a leader encourages followers to innovate and challenge themselves. Because as a transactional leader, you know, like we mentioned, it's a basic form of leadership where we transact with you and that's it. But transformational leaders really have a clear vision that they are able to articulate to their followers. And these leaders are also able to help followers experience the same passion and the same drive that they have, which is important, because you can't be a leader and you've got all this passion and motivation and you really amped up and you're ready, but you have no one following you, okay? Because you're not allowing them that opportunity to really, you know, be creative in that sense. And lastly, but not least, is individual consideration. And what do I mean by this? I mean, you need to care about the people that are following you. You need to serve as a role model to them. You know, it's not also about what you say, but it's about how you say it and what you do. Because remember, they need to build trust in you and they need to respect you as a leader. And it's important that you care of them. So as a transformational leader, do you have those one-on-one conversations with your individual team members to say, how are you doing? As a leader, what can I do better for you? How can I help you perform better? You know, what are some of those impactful things that is, you know, personally that is impacting your performance at work that we can try and assist you with? Because we live in, you know, in such COVID times now where, you know, all of the situations is really impacting us. It's impacting, you know, the work from home. It's impacting, you know, some of the things that we're doing on a daily basis. And we've sort of changed the new narrative of how we work. And as a transformational leader, are you sort of allowing your employees this time to say, I understand what you're going through. Let me help you with this. Let me take you on this journey. But at the same time, understanding that there's still work that needs to be done and objectives that still need to be met. So if you look at, you know, some of the competencies which coincide with transformational leadership style, you know, we know that transformational leadership seeks to create a positive change for those to follow. I think we've covered on that a lot. But I think it's also important to remember that a transformational leader really enhances the morale, performance, and the motivation of the employees. They really need to inspire change and drive that strong purpose in their organization. Remember, when as a leader, you don't need a title to be a leader, but what's important is to remember that you are creating a culture of trust. You are creating that innovation within the organization. And as transformational leaders, you need to be able to set realistic and achievable vision for the organization, but you need to be able to communicate this. You need to be able to communicate this effectively so the people that are following you have this sense of inspiration. They have this sense of commitment to the purpose that you have. And by, you know, sort of by getting every person to buy into this common vision, transformational leaders are able to strongly guide the organization in the direction that they want the organization to move. And it's important to remember that, you know, as a transformational leader, you have all of these characteristics that's sort of put into play, but you need to be able to know, how do you facilitate this team's success by building the relationship with them? How do you sort of motivate their creativity levels? How do you, you know, display commitment with them and seek improvement and involvement from them? Because that's what you need to do. You need to involve them in the vision of the organization so they can go on this journey with you. You know, we're looking at sort of a transformational leader, and we're saying our, you know, all our organizations, and you'll know this, you know, we all need transformational leadership. We need to really move away from the sort of transactional way of doing things. But how do we develop this sort of transformational leader? It starts with with self-mastery first. And what is self-mastery? Well, self-mastery is the self-development from people on the inside out. And really, it's about understanding yourself. It's about creating a sense of vision and a sense of purpose. It's really about what we've just spoken about, which is stimulating the innovation and creative thinking. You know, it really sort of discovers one's behavior patterns. You know, whether good or bad, as a leader, we need to unpack this. We really need to sort of know what are some of the bad things that we're doing, and because none of us are perfect. And even if we look at some of the great leaders that are there, we know that they're great leaders. Many of them have bad qualities. Perfect example was the Amazon case study that we looked at yesterday. You know, when we look at an outside view, we know that Amazon is a great company, but when we had some sort of internal undercover person going in there, we looked at some of the transactional leadership sort of aspects that they've done where the employees were disengaged, they were scared and so forth. So as a leader, you need to look at these 4 aspects of saying, I want to be a transformational leader. Great. But now I need to look at myself. I need to look at the interpersonal mastery of how do I communicate to others? How do I create a positive environment? And then how do I lead that? How do I lead change? How do I improve the quality? And how do I sort of build relationships and build people to succeed? And with that, tying this up is a great, sort of steps to transformational leadership. And I've again, there's a lot, and I've seen the 4 steps here, which one is really talking about developing a vision. So creating that vision and sort of creating the right vision to attract the right followers. Once you've sort of created that vision, it's now about selling that vision to build a strong network. Then it's about creating that journey, creating that roadmap, creating that sort of direction of how do you want to take them from point A to point B, like we've mentioned. And then it's about leading the charge and being at the forefront, being vulnerable, taking those risks, really making sure that you're standing up and you're committed. And it's okay to say that you don't know. It's okay to say that, we failed here and we may sort of need to, look at other ideas, innovative ideas of how do we improve. This sort of links back to now the case study that I want to discuss with you. And it's a case study by Ceridian, who is a company which focuses on human capital innovation and technology. And this case study really focuses about when the sales and profits of this company started to fall, a CEO's sort of knee-jerk reaction, if I may put it that way, would be maybe to push their people harder to achieve results. Think about some of the things that happen now with COVID and how, some sort of businesses are sort of, weren't prepared enough, so they're knee-jerking in terms of this. And, while this tactic may work for a short term, it's sort of detrimental to the organization's long-term success for the organization. It sort of breeds low engagement, high turnover. There's a lack of trust in future stability of the company. But this is one CEO who actually changed the leadership and transformed his company's employee metrics and future trajectory, is David Ossip. And David is who is sort of one of the recently listed, in Glassdoor's high-rated CEOs list. And when he took over as CEO of the human capital management technology company, Ceridian, in 2013, he really inherited a high disengaged workforce by, declining business results. And Ossip had a monumental task ahead of him. He had very unhappy employees, and unhappy employees cost the organization over 550 billion rand a year. Okay, sorry, $550 billion a year. And this problem impacts your top and your bottom line, because the results, and for every other business and metrics, impacts that, and every business is there to make a profit. So learning from him, he understood that skilled and purposeful leadership with a depth of understanding is what really engages people. And that's what is required from them to actually turn the business around. Now, Ossip's first executive meeting yielded one key consensus, and he said that without high employee engagement, Ceridian could not drive the other changes it wanted and it required. And employee engagement had to become the organization's core focus. And it's important to remember that transformational leadership ties into employee satisfaction and employee engagement. And I think yesterday, when we were talking, Taffy made a comment, and he said that your culture of your organization can eat your strategy for breakfast, lunch, and supper. Because if you can have the best strategy, but if you don't have the right culture and the right people on board, you're not going to be able to achieve that. So I'm going to share this video with you, and something that sort of I would like you to just keep in mind as well is some of the questions of this, which we'll discuss later, is, how is this culture, compared to the Amazon's culture, which sort of one is more likely to succeed long term, what do you think Cerient's competitive advantage is? What is the people impact, and how sustainable is this model? So let's have a look at this video.
Cerient is a technology company that makes work-life better.
The number one reason why I'm here is genuinely the people.
People are key, whether it's at Ceridian or at our customers. Engaged employees really are the foundation to any company and will always lead to excellence.
The new definition of Ceridian is half startup, half legacy company.
One thing that remains the same, our core values, our way. Customer focus, transparency, diligence, optimism, agility. Those aren't just words on paper. We live them every day.
The culture's a lot different than any other job I've had.
The working environment is fast-paced and exciting.
We're always moving, we're always changing.
A lot of people step in to help each other.
And that's from the top down.
We're an enterprise organization that truly does operate more of like a software startup. We care about each other individually and professionally. That's why I come to work every day. People are genuinely invested in what we're doing here, and that drives me. That's energy, that's passion. I want to be a part of that.
Wow. Looking at that video, I can only imagine what sort of culture and environment they work in and how high performance they must be. But, you know, coming to some of the questions, and please share your thoughts with me or with us in the chat box of, you know, sort of comparing Cerient's culture to Amazon's culture, of which, you know, we sort of discussed yesterday. Which one, you know, do you think is sort of more sustainable or more to succeed in the long term? And I see a lot of the chats coming up there saying, you know, that caring got me, you know, wow, healthy culture. Thank you for those comments. But I think what's, you know, sort of important, you know, to note is the difference and highlighting the difference of transactional leadership compared to transformational leadership. And we see how they were able to understand that the employee satisfaction was so important to them that they needed to focus on that. Unlike sort of Amazon, where, you know, we've seen that, you know, they sort of gave them devices and it was about managing productivity and output. Whereas here it was really, really about taking care of my employees, having that positive impact and making sure that we care for them. And I like some of the comments that are coming through, and as someone said, there's empathy there as well. Taffy, I'm interested to hear some of your thoughts on this.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks a lot, Kyle. It's very interesting how watching that video and looking at the non-verbal cues that are coming from the participants in the video themselves just tell you how relaxed an environment that is. And totally different from what we saw with Amazon. You know, you see people sitting very relaxed and they're chatting. You also see in that video quite a diverse group of people, you know, which I suppose is a sample of what that organization represents. And I also saw there, and it reminds me of a question that came yesterday where somebody asked, how transparent does a leader have to be? And here's a company that's showcasing this type of environment, and one of their taglines is transparency. I think the other one was optimism. And so I think it speaks a lot to the type of leader or the type of leadership that is within that company. And, you know, given a choice, that type of environment with the performance that's coming against the Amazon environment, and yes, they are getting the performance, but I think when we look at long-term sustainability, I would punt for Ceridian because I think it's a much healthier environment for the staff.
And I like some of the comments that are coming through, which exactly speaks to what you're saying, you know, is that, you know, it's really about that transparency. It's really about creating that environment and that culture of leadership. And, you know, if we think about, you know, it says, you know, one of the questions I want to pose is, what do you think is Cerient's competitive advantage? And I can see some of the chats coming through. But, you know, for me, I picked up from hearing them, speak, was that really there's sort of a shared vision there, and one thing that I think, I'm assuming he's the CEO, but he says that their core vision will always stay the same. And it's so important as a transformational leader to know what your vision is, and to say that this is my vision, it's not going to change, but how I lead my people will sort of change. And the competitive advantage they've had to change the sort of technology company around has been amazing.
100%. I think you look at it, and there was another comment that came through on that video, which was from legacy to, a legacy company, half legacy, half startup. And I think this points to that endurance that we're talking about. They've managed to transform themselves. And it is very important, I think, to highlight that what we're talking about and what we're trying to articulate is not creating a country club style of management, as we saw yesterday on the managerial grid. Results are still important. They are absolutely important, because that is the reason why companies exist. It's obviously to make more money and have some left behind after they've paid all their expenses, is to make a profit. However, what we need to realize and recognize is that if we value people, because people are that asset that actually creates that, we need to make an environment where that goal is still achieved, but with a more excited people, where it's not really about chasing each other and looking after each other. In terms of productivity and measurement and so on, that is still important. That is still very, very important. And I think what you will find if you go into Ceridian is they still look at those metrics. They still do, because without that, they're not going to be able to survive. However, it's how they're achieving those numbers, and it's more about the shared vision that everybody gets everybody excited to come to work, rather than having, a carrot and stick kind of approach. It's not sustainable. A carrot and stick, it's not really sustainable, because the moment you hit a bump, you're going to find it very, very difficult to call on your biggest resource, who are people, to actually get out of that turbulence. So I think their competitive advantage stems from that, because it's going to be very, very difficult for other companies to replicate what they've got. And really, when we talk about competitive advantage, is how do you differentiate yourself from your competitors?
Yeah, and I think exactly what you're saying is sort of that impact, and coming back to, I think one of them said was that they help each other and they care about each other, not just professionally but personally, and that's what sort of transformational leadership is about. It's really about caring. It's about leading with empathy. And I see, a comment from Malcolm Peterson, who's one of the participants, said, what stood out for them was that it was about the tone of the top, basically, from the top, basically. So that same culture is really practiced across the company. And in fact, management provides an example of what business is about. And he makes reference to yesterday, which says Amazon was more about results and not really focused on the asset and well-being. And by assets, he means people. And we see the impact that it has, that sort of culture and that business has on its people, which is so important. And I think Temba also makes a comment that says in Ceridian, the employees are free, and it shows their working condition is healthy compared to what we've seen yesterday. So yeah, it's so important that the impact of people and creating that sort of that environment of that sense of belonging, that sense of they know that they are part of something, and they're just not an employee number, or they're not just there to get that paycheck at the end of the month, but they actually belong to an organization that cares for them, cares for their family, and cares about their job, cares about helping them succeed in their role. All right, there is some discussion points, and I like the comments and the sort of questions that are coming through in the chat box. So please keep them coming and we'll try and address them as we go along. But it's good to see your interaction through this. But there's some sort of insights that I want to sort of talk about is, how does transformational leadership influence employee engagement and culture? Now, we need to understand that transactional leadership, like we've been saying, it's really about, a transaction. I get paid a salary and then I have to leave. But transformational leadership is really about impacting employee engagement. Because remember, by having a high employee engagement workforce, you'll have sort of a better performing, a high performance culture would really talk to your productivity. It really talks to you about your operations and how long-term and sustainable you can actually go. And with that, it's the importance of alignment of the company values and personal values. And one of the comments, when we were chatting earlier, was, now that, we've sort of moving from a transactional leadership to a transformational leadership, does it mean that if I don't buy into the values of the company that we need to fire these people? We shouldn't, it's now about how do I create that alignment of saying, this is the company values. We understand that, this is your values, but how do we create that alignment? So we create that sense of belonging to the organization. So our values are aligned. So we know that when you are doing your job and your behavior as an employee is actually aligned to our company. And I think the last most important part of the insight of this is really understanding the why and the importance of transformational leadership. And it's not just, about, how to do this, but I think we've mentioned in one of the videos we watched earlier is about creating that why. It's what benefit do we have, but why do I need to do this? How is this going to impact not only me, but my team and the organization? And it's really about creating a shared vision. It's really about, sort of going in there and disrupting the market. We were talking about a gig economy yesterday that Amazon used, where they sort of, they come in for a special gig and they leave. But we've seen other companies use the same model of the gig economy, and they've been so successful because they understand that the people are only coming there for a season. They understand that people are only going to be there for a short time. But how do I transform that person? How do I get the best out of that person without being transactional and really transforming them, which is really, really important in this sort of aspect of transformational leadership. So thank you so much for your time. I'm now going to hand over to Taffy, who's going to now look at imagining the future of work.
Good evening again. Thank you, Kyle. I think everybody would agree that it looks like, we are trying to move towards a leadership style that is very that recognizes the humanity of the environment that we operate in. So what I'm going to try and unpack over the next 10 or 11 slides is really what does the future of work look like? We're talking about this transformational leadership. So what are those things that we have to recognize as individuals and start working towards so that we can face the challenges that will come? So in 2008, there was a Gallup poll that was conducted on honesty and ethics among workers in 21 different professions. And a mere 12% of respondents felt business executives had a high or very high integrity. That's 12%, an all-time low, with a 37% low, very low rating. The executives came in behind lawyers, union leaders, real estate agents, building contractors, and bankers. My apologies if any of those professions are on this platform, but I think this again goes to the perception of what we see these people as. In another survey by Management Today, 31% of respondents stated that they had low or no trust in their management team. So you can see that the whole realm of leadership has been affected by things that have gone on before. So how do we begin to change that? What are the challenges that we need to face? for the future. So leadership has always been challenging. I think that goes without saying, but the future of work will bring fresh challenges. Right now, what we're living through COVID is a prime example. Over the next decade, leaders will have to face obstacles and challenges not faced by current or past leaders. So you can't refer back and defer back to the history books and say, okay, this is what happened and this is what they did. But what are those challenges and how do we then start navigating them? In this book, Jacob Morgan, called The Future Leader, who he interviewed more than 140 top CEOs from around the world and surveyed more than 14,000 LinkedIn users. One of the questions he was asked was about the challenges future leaders would face. From their varied and insightful responses, he broke the challenges down to two main areas, which is how do you futurize and how do you humanize? So you can't afford to lead organizations by always looking in the rearview mirror. It's like driving, you know. Yes, you can cast your eye into the rearview mirror, but you can't drive by looking at that. They need to futurize and bring their organizations into the future. But of course, it isn't that simple. There are numerous challenges that fall into this category. And what are some of those challenges? Generally, short-term thinking versus long-term thinking. For anybody that's in a leadership position, the pressure to achieve targets usually and sometimes overrides the need for long-term thinking. So we think on a quarter-by-quarter basis, on a month-by-month basis, on hitting the target. What was the target for today? And this is obviously to please leadership, it's to please shareholders and investors. And we've been conditioned to think that way in the short term and expect fast results. Future leaders, however, need to be focused on the long-term success for both the organization and their people. Adapting to technology is going to be key. Yesterday, we spoke about what impact AI is going to have on companies and leadership. I think it's important to note at this point that all these are tools that are made available to us in order for us to be able to achieve our goals. So new technology is coming incredibly quickly. I think the rate at which things are changing, and it often seems like once we finally mastered something, it's outdated. You just have to look at a phone. You go in, you buy a new Samsung phone, which is the latest, and 3 or 4 months later, they've got one with 100 more new functions on it. You know, leaders need to pay attention to technology and be able to change their perspective to understand what new developments are most important and what else is coming down the pipeline. So with all this change that is happening, right, you will find that as a leader, you are required to keep up with the pace of change. The change is happening incredibly fast, and future leaders will be challenged to keep up. They need to embrace change, stay agile, and be open to new ideas. The pace of change is faster, and while you don't have to know everything, you do have to know how to get it. The commitment to being a lifelong learner, which we spoke about yesterday, about how important that is to a leader. The CEO of SunTrust says it's a premium. The premium that is placed on that is much higher now for the leaders than it was before. So how do you also start making the change that will make you futurize? We need to be able to move away from the status quo. So you're keeping pace with the change, but it's all fair and good to be able to know that there is change around, but how do you bring that in and internalize it in your organization and start moving away from the status quo? And remember, just because something worked in the past doesn't mean it will still work in the future. Leaders need to be confident and bold to take risks that move away from the status quo just because that's how things have always been done. We spoke at length yesterday about culture. And I think this is where we start seeing it, in terms of being able to take the lead and make those changes that you're talking about. So the other element that was highlighted was the humanized element, right? We tend to put a lot of emphasis on the future of technology. And I think this is becoming almost a fad right now, where everything is about technology, technology, technology. Working in that space, I think, has also taught me that, yes, you need to have the best technology, but it can't work without people. And sometimes you can have the best technology and put it in, but if that technology does not solve the challenges that the people have, it doesn't matter how good it is not going to work. So the challenges of humanizing involve balancing humans with technology and ensuring your people are prepared to succeed in the future. We spoke as well yesterday about leading diverse teams, and not everyone in the world looks and thinks the same. And your organization should reflect that. So I think we've got to recognize that with the ease of travel and globalization, people are moving, and we will come across different individuals from different backgrounds with different religious beliefs and with different mindsets. And diverse teams bring in new perspectives. Future leaders need to be able to put together teams of people with different backgrounds, genders, race, sexual orientations, and belief systems to work together toward a common goal. As the CEO, Sebastian Bazin of Eco Hotel said, one mark of a future leader should be the ability to work alongside people of different ages and with different backgrounds. Attracting and retaining top talent. I think this is key. We spoke about the gig economy, and we spoke about how fluid the human capital environment is becoming. People are an organization's biggest asset, but many companies face the challenge of finding and keeping great employees. Instead of job candidates trying to convince organizations they are the best choices, now leaders and organizations must convince potential employees that they are a great place to work. We're moving from an era of lifetime employment to lifetime employability, where if your people don't feel that they learn and progress, they're up to speed in the areas of expertise, they will leave because they will become obsolete. We have to admit that we are not bringing in the company people with a perspective that we had 20 years ago, where you got a job and you stayed in that job for years and years. 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, that people stay forever. Today, what is happening is that we come in, the Generation Z, I think it's called, they will come in and they will recognize that they're not growing, they're not learning. And that thirst for knowledge is driving them to go to companies where they feel more accepted. There is an issue that as a leader, you have to appreciate and understand. And I think this one also speaks to the aspect of technology that we've just spoken about. And not everybody in the company will be at the same level of understanding and the same level of ability when you introduce new technology. So as a leader, how do you reskill and upskill employees? How do you make them accept the changes that are coming so that they do not feel left out? You know, a transformational leader or a leader of the future does not really leave anybody behind unless that person wants to be left behind. And what I mean by that is if their attitude is correct and if their vision is the same and their motivation levels are okay, that is the type of person that you want to keep in your company. They may not have the skill, but as a leader, you need to try and find a way of how best to upskill employees and give them what they need for future success. Companies today are expected, whether it's from a internal perspective or an external perspective, but companies are expected to do good. CSI has become a very significant factor in how people view different brands, and brands that are not seen to be doing their bit for the communities that they exist in, or the people who are less privileged than everybody else, will be viewed in a very dim light. People want to be part of organizations that care. And as much as we're making money, we need to show that we do care. But in many cases, the leaders and shareholders are conditioned to think more about profits than doing good in the world. Future leaders need to make sure their work is improving the world and then share that message with others. I saw a comment earlier on during the video that you shared, Kyle, regarding Ceridin. And one of the comments was, this was probably a marketing initiative designed to appease shareholders. And I can't stand up here and say that that is not true. However, you know, if you're a company of integrity, you're not going to say something that does not, that cannot be verified. So as much as these videos may be made about, you know, and they're the feel-good factors, they have to be verifiable, because the fallout from creating a perception that is not true is far worse. So yes, people want to be associated with organizations that do good. And how do you do that? The only way you can do that is by making an organization human. As a leader, this is your role. With automation and a focus on efficiency, many organizations fall into the trap of focusing on results, Amazon, instead of people. Each individual matters, and the future leaders need to understand their employees as people, not just cogs in the machine. So how do we start? What skills do we need to start working on in order for us to be able to get to that stage where we can futurize and we can humanize? I think there are 9 mindset skills that I think we need to understand, and I'll unpack them briefly. We need to be a global citizen. The world is becoming increasingly connected, which means every company has the potential for worldwide employees and customers. The mindset of the global citizen means thinking globally and embracing diversity. Leaders need to appreciate and understand new cultures, actively seek out diverse teams, lead employees with different backgrounds, and know how to enter and succeed in new global markets. Servant leadership. You know, I think this is a term that has come into the fore, I think, a lot recently when we look at some of the global leaders. And I will share a slide where we've got, you know, some of these global leaders that are well respected the world over. But the servant mindset goes against much of the old way of thinking, that leaders stay at the top of the company and you cannot touch them. You know, this is, that's the way it has always been. But the mindset of the servant means you practice humility and that you serve 4 groups: your leaders, if you should have them, your customers, your team, and yourself. Another skill that we need to learn is, I think I'll use the analogy of cooking here. And just like chefs, you know, who balance numerous ingredients to create a masterful meal, leaders must balance 2 of the most important ingredients of any business, which is the humanity and the technology. It keeps coming back, you know, that one cannot work without the other. And if you get that right as a business, I think you've overcome one great obstacle. What this means is that we have to embrace technology and using it to improve efficiency in the organization, while also providing a sense of purpose and caring for human employees. So here again, you know, if we relate to what we saw yesterday, and I think a lot of us agreed that as much as there was focus on results and Amazon was performing very, very well from a financial standpoint, the failure to show employees any sense of purpose and any caring for them. You know, if 74% of your employees are afraid to go to the bathroom because they might miss a target, I think there's something that's not quite right there. One side cannot succeed without the other. So the technology must work together with the human element. You know, another mindset which is critically important as we talk about the journey to move, you know, from transactional leader into a transformational leader who's ready to face the future, is we need to be like explorers, the explorers of old, and embrace the unknown. A lot of the issues that we're having to deal with as leaders are things that we've never had to deal with before. So we need to be open to new ideas and be able to change the course as the world around us changes. As I mentioned earlier, you know, it's all fair and good to be looking and saying, oh, wow, that is changing. But we need to be able to make the adjustments within our companies as the world evolves. So just like the explorers had to continually learn, leaders need to be super perpetual learners and practice curiosity. Yesterday, we touched upon the need for coaching and mentoring as one of the things that you would need. Great coaches motivate, they inspire, and engage their teams while caring about each member as an individual off the field. So understand, connect with your people. Likewise, future leaders need to appreciate employees as individuals as opposed to viewing everyone as just workers. The best coaches and leaders develop their people to be more successful than them. You know, I once had a boss who always had an expression that the moment you find yourself as the brightest person in the room, you're probably sitting in the wrong room. And I didn't understand that until, you know, much later in my career, where you found that you can't contribute to an organization if you are the one who always has the answers. Because one, sometimes you actually don't have all the answers, that's a fact. And secondly, people defer some of that accountability to you just by the mere fact that you're always the one who has the answers. So they stop thinking and they stop being innovative, you know. Another mindset that is critically important, especially when we look at going into the future, is you have to be a futurist. And you need to make sure that your organization is never surprised by what the future might bring. That's a little bit of a challenge now, considering what we've just gone through with COVID. But I think that's what happened with COVID was unprecedented. However, the world in which we live and work is constantly changing and full of unknowns. Futurists consider multiple scenarios and think through new possibilities. They stay on top of trends and are connected to their networks. And this was actually the #1 skill, according to the 140 CEOs interviewed, as I mentioned earlier on. Teenagers seem to always be current on the latest technology, and future leaders must be technology teenagers. Be inquisitive, always look and see and find out what's happening. They don't need to be experts in the practical application, but they should embrace technology and know how best to leverage it to serve their company. They need to be tech savvy and digitally fluent. And we've learned the hard way with what has just happened over the last 6 months, that those that were tech savvy and digitally fluent were able to pivot very quickly and move into an online space when the brick and mortar model was impacted by, you know, the lockdown and the pandemic. Communication. I think Kyle went to great lengths to explain the need for a transformational leader to be able to communicate. Now, the future leader as well must be the master of communication. They listen to understand and do more than just hear what people are saying. They use verbal and non-verbal cues to connect with people and know the best channels to use to cut through the noise and deliver their messages. Listening and communication are two timeless aspects of great leadership, yet they are also two the two which are changing the most. How do we communicate? Now we're digitally connected. How do you use those tools to always stay in touch with your people? So I think it's important to understand that you can't be sending messages as well at 12 midnight to your subordinates about a report which is due at 8 o'clock the following morning. That's not communication, and that's not staying connected. It's understanding how and when to say those messages in the right way. And the last one that I want to speak about here on the mindsets is being like Yoda. So for decades, leaders have shied away from being emotional. But in the future, leaders need to be emotionally intelligent, like Yoda, and develop their empathy and self-awareness. I think one of the endearing memories from the pandemic, as stressful as it was the president struggling to put on a mask in one of his addresses right at the very beginning. And the following few days, him also being able to laugh at himself at that error on his part. So, and how everybody was able to then connect with the president after such an event, and how he changed in the eyes of a lot of people, particularly through that, and showed some great leadership during that time. Great communicators build connections and aren't afraid to be vulnerable. Empathy is understanding the feelings and perspective of others. Self-awareness is about understanding your strengths and weaknesses and helping others understand yours as well. So, one element that I would like to bring here about what it will be like to be a future leader is, in order to build a sustainable team or organization, it's not about what you do. It is about how you do what you do. And on that slide there, you can see some of the iconic leaders that we all recognize. You know, there's Mahatma Gandhi, there's Nelson Mandela, there's Martin Luther King, there's Mother Teresa there. And all these individuals were able to show and live what they truly believed in. And it's a lesson that we can take in organization, that's sustainable advantage and enduring success, both for companies and for people who work for those companies, now lies in the realm of how, the new frontier of conduct. And there's research that is being conducted that shows that it's values-driven teams, organizations, and communities that are the most successful on the planet. Value-driven organizations generate higher earnings, they are more customer-focused and more productive, and they have levels of employee engagement, higher retention, and lower absenteeism, because employees feel cared for, they're willing and bring creativity and discretionary energy to their work. So everything sounds nice, you know, what I've spoken about, and it should be quite easy. You know, we're going to start learning all of these things, becoming futuristics, becoming technology teenagers, being more human, listening more than we are talking. But there are certain things that prevent us from being able to do that. And what I would like to share with you is a video that speaks to biases that prevent us from actually being able to live through this. So just watch the video, and there will be a few questions that I would like to just pose for participants.
Good morning. How are you?
Cool.
So, can we talk about how you got here?
think I got a funny looking face? I just thought it was funny.
Hey kids, I'm telling you, go right here.
Man, we ain't doing nothing.
Go right here before I'm called cops.
So, you didn't do anything?
Nope.
Then what's all this?
Depends on who's reading it, I guess.
Well, looks broken. Skateboarding, huh?
Yes.
Is this the first time you've hurt yourself?
No, I get hurt all the time.
At home?
At home? He hurt himself skateboarding at the park.
Okay, ma'am. I'm going to have a counselor come in and speak with you.
A counselor? For what? He's okay.
Well, I done told you them tricks were gonna put you in the hospital.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, too. A nurse will be in a few minutes to help you check out.
What's up?
That doctor thought I did this to him.
How you doing?
Hi.
It ain't fair.
Fair has nothing to do with this. This is about you taking responsibility for your actions. Look, I know so many young men just like you that didn't do anything. And yet, most of them are in prison.
You don't know me. I ain't going to no prison.
If you don't want to end up in prison, you're going to have to get some new priorities and probably some new friends, too. Look, you're not getting any younger. You need to get an education so you can get a good job.
Like you? You just like everybody else. You think you see, but you don't see. You see what you want to see.
I see what's in this folder. It shows me what you've been doing.
I ain't doing nothing.
I am not doing anything. Stop!
I ain't doing nothing.
I'm not doing anything. And yes, you were. Get to the timeout chair. Now, please. I'm sorry. I am so sorry.
Right. Apologies for the quality of the video. I think it was a bit shaky. I hope that you'll be able to watch. What we'll do is when the slides are shared, you'll be able to get the link so that you can actually watch the video again. But I think if you got the gist of that, I have a few questions that I would like to pose for you to just think about. And do you identify with the video? Are these situations that resonate with you on any kind of level, and even in the workplace, it could be, and how has your individual experience with something like this altered the way you respond to others? How has your experience altered your leadership style? Remember, I had pitched this video as being an obstacle to becoming the future leader. And there are certain biases that we have learned over the years that prevent us from doing that. And the last one is, I would like you to reflect on interactions that have undermined you and what you will do differently going forward. And if we can just think about that, and please put your comments in the chat session, and let's share. Remember, we spoke about being vulnerable, and we spoke about some of these things. And I think the beginning of us being able to move forward is us accepting that some of these things do exist, and we need to learn how to move beyond them. So the last few slides I want to share with you is another concept that we want to introduce. So we've spoken about the transformational leader, and there are different elements to that transformational leadership. And one of them is obviously moving towards the inclusive leadership, because a transformational leader is somebody who's able to change things. And they're also able to change and move towards a new term that is coming out, which is, inclusive leadership. And this is something that is being recommended for managers of the future. And a recent article in Harvard Business Review says that what leaders say and do makes up to 70% difference as to whether an individual reports feeling included. And this really matters, because the more people feel included, the more they speak up, the more they go the extra mile, the more they collaborate, all of which ultimately lifts organizational performance. So all of these things, yes, they might sound fuzzy, warm and fuzzy, and so on, but the point is, when it's done correctly, the ultimate goal is to improve organizational performance. So given this formula, inclusive leadership is emerging as a unique and critical capability, helping organizations adapt to diverse customers, markets, ideas, and talent. Their research found inclusive leaders share a cluster of 6 signature traits. Right. The first one is commitment. It all starts with commitment, because staying the course is hard. You're going to meet obstacles, you're going to meet resistance. As we all know, change is very hard, and a lot has been written about how some good initiatives have failed because people have refused to change. So you've got to be committed. You've got to have the courage to be humble and vulnerable, and to say, I'm not as inclusive as I could be. You've got to get rid, you've got to be cognizant of bias. You've got to understand your biases. It's impossible for us to think that we can get rid of our bias, which have been built up over years and years, by just clicking a finger and saying, I'm not going to be biased anymore. What we need to try and do is to be aware of whatever that bias is. And inclusive leaders are deeply aware of their blind spots and try and manage them. Curiosity and being deeply curious about other people's points of views. It speaks to the listening ability. Cultural intelligence, and deeply motivated to understand other cultures you interact with. And being able to collaborate and get a team of different people to be better than they are, because a diverse thinking team is greater than the sum of its parts. So some people might question, as whether there is actually any companies that have done that. And the answer to that is yes. Companies like McDonald's, where leaders at McDonald's publicly share their support for workplace inclusion. As recently as last year, McDonald's launched a new strategy for gender diversity called Better Together, Gender Balance and Diversity Strategy. This included several on-the-ground initiatives like Women in Tech, like a Women in Tech program for upskilling in data science, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and so forth. The company will also review its high potential talent pools to accelerate careers with a diversity focus. To mark the launch, McDonald's CEO Steve Easterbrook, along with senior leaders, changed their profile pictures on LinkedIn with one that depicted the signature McDonald arches turned upside down. This reflects how the company's leaders are committed to overturning the gender status quo by staying aware of unconscious bias. Another company that has managed to espouse inclusivity is Salesforce. And as part of everyday leader team member interactions, leadership takes on a more on-ground dimension, influencing everyday workplace interactions. Authentic conversations, inclusive meetings, fair work assignments, and inclusive team activities are among the tips the company recommends, right? Google, which we all know is this huge tech company, Google delivers key data to its senior leaders for more inclusive decisions, and this is diversity and inclusion data. To make genuinely inclusive decisions, company leaders need comprehensive, accurate, and bias-free employee data. That's precisely what Google is looking to achieve with its annual diversity report, published every year since 2014. And as you can see, these companies are companies that are successful. They are enduring. I think Procter & Gamble has been around for a very long time. Deloitte, everybody is very familiar with Deloitte. McDonald's has been around for a long time. I think the upstarts there would probably be Google and Facebook, but they're also taking the lead. Procter & Gamble believes in nurturing disagreement and listening to every employee voice, you know. So as you can see, this is starting to set a trend for inclusive leadership. And to what end do we want to do this? You know, as I said earlier, we believe that everything should lead to the bottom line. And apart from the obvious cultural benefits of inclusive leadership, it also has tangible impact on the bottom line. Research by Deloitte found that teams with inclusive leaders are 17% more likely to say they are high performing. So the teams themselves, 20% more likely to make better decisions, and 29% more likely to collaborate. And in 2019, Catalyst.org surveyed 2,164 employees in 8 countries to understand the correlation between workplace experiences and leadership style. The study found that 45% of experiences of an inclusive workplace could be explained by managerial inclusive leadership. And these statistics indicate 2 things, right? An inclusive leadership style can boost productivity by a significant margin. Second, leadership is strongly correlated to how included an employee feels in the workplace. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to close off the presentation for today. And thank you very much for listening and participating as you have done. Thank you.
Thank you, Tefi. Okay, so we've got a long list of questions here. and we'll see how it goes in terms of the time we have left, and we'll take the rest over for tomorrow. Maybe I can start with something that was raised by Julian and Wandisile. Wandisile says that leaders need to, and use the word, suck up to followers. Julian, on the other hand, said there's only so much leaders can do. So talking again about what we said yesterday, how much can leaders actually do in terms of this transformation, or to embed transformation? That's something that Alicia also asked. So maybe you want to start off with that one. Kyle or Taffy?
Sure. So I think, there's a difference between, being a sort of ethical leader, and this is something that we spoke about yesterday. And I think, if I may use the term, the sucking up comes into this. If you want a leader where you want people to suck up to you and sort of do, what you tell them to do and so forth, then you sort of, falling into that transactional sort of leadership style, because as a transformational leader, it's really about leading those people and creating that buy-in. And if you really want to be transformational, then you shouldn't get people to suck up into you, because then you're not being authentic. You're not really being that true leader. You're sort of buying this power, in terms of, so I think it's important to sort of draw, understand, when you're sucking up too much, and are you sucking up to the right person for the right reasons, for me, put it that way.
Thank you. No, I think the point that it was Wandisile was making was that and maybe falls in line with what you talked about, servant leadership, that the leader actually is there for the followers.
Yeah.
But linked to that is the point Julian made. How much can leaders do? If I had to put on a cynical hat and say, well, hey, people are paid to do what they're supposed to be doing, must we still now motivate and force them to and influence them to carry on? I mean, surely there's a point at which that much, at which leaders can do that much and no more.
I agree, Prof. And I think another important point that I would like to make here is we're speaking of all these aspects that leaders have to perform. But if I was to draw an analogy, and look at when we talk about interventions, any intervention can only work if there is a meeting of the minds. There has to be that need, that desire to get help, and also that intervention, as somebody external, you must be able to recognize that now is the time to actually put that intervention in place, because that person is ready. So I think there is a difference between trying to force people who do not work, because one thing we have not really spoken about is that leader is still needs to be decisive, still needs to recognize that this person is beyond redemption, and still be able to make the hard decisions.
Yeah.
And still, look at it and say, listen, this person is not performing. They've been given a chance. They've been given the training. They've been given every opportunity to redeem themselves, but they're still not willing to turn up. That person has no place in the organization. And I think as a leader, you've got to be able to recognize that as well. And people are employed to do their job. And what we are saying is that, you have this whole bunch of people who just come in and they want to sit around and talk. There still needs to be results. And the leader still has to be decisive. They still have to be, I don't want to say ruthless, but when the time requires, they've got to make the decision. They've got to make a decision that saves, the greater good of the company. And, 2 or 3 bad apples can't bring the whole company down. Thank you.
Thank you, Taffy. It was interesting. Morris raised the question: how can we be transformational when we're dealing with virtual work? and virtual meetings. And, you know, following on from yesterday when we talked about compassion fatigue, Tabi saying asked, what about Zoom fatigue?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, and I think everybody would resonate with this. That at the start of the lockdown, for example, I think people were working ridiculous hours because you just got up, you sat in front of your laptop, and you just kept on going. You know, everybody was just reaching out. When you thought of hey, I need to say something to Kyle, you picked up your phone, you didn't even check the time, you just called. And I think it struck home the longer we were in lockdown that, you know, those boundaries that we still need to have, like when you actually do leave the office, you still need to maintain them. What I found I tried to do was check the time, you know, before you pick up the phone. And I went back to the routine that I had when I was still going to the office, you know, because at the beginning, you'll just get up, sit in front of your laptop, and you'll eat your food in front of your laptop. And I started going back to the routine of trying to make sure that, you know, I was taking those breaks and I was actually walking away from that. So in the digital age, as I said, you know, because we're so connected, there is a temptation to always use the tools that we've got to talk to people. But again, it's that sensitivity around people's other lives. You know, if you're staying and you connect with your people and you know that they've got families, they've got personal lives to live, you need to try and reel that back, you know, and make sure that you're maintaining boundaries. So as much as we're saying that you need to connect with people, but connecting with people is still understanding what boundaries you can and cannot go over.
Yes, thank you. So there were a number of questions about how do you embed transformation? How do you make people transformational? How many organizations are in fact transformational? So I think in the main, we answered some of those questions, but perhaps we just want to address that. For example, somebody said, well, when readers are traditionally and are transactionally focused on the bottom line, how can we be transformational? And then
I think
yeah, sorry. One question is, well, is it just not about situational leadership, that we need to, in a particular situation, recognize that what is required here is transformation?
No, I think it's important, and I think, you know, exactly what you said in terms of situational leadership. You know, we need to be able to know when do we need to transform, how do we transform, and sometimes you're going to have to be transactional. You know, like Taffy mentioned, and I think like you mentioned as well, there's a job to be done and it needs to get done, and those things are transactional. But I think in terms of transformation, you know, it's important that we know as leaders when do we need to transform and how to transform. Because there's one thing saying, you know, we need to transform, but we don't know how to do it, and we don't get the buy-in from our team and from the people that follow us. And I mean, we've got recent examples. You know, we've recently, in the last few months, we've seen sort of, you know, things of transformation, diversity, inclusion with some of the recent events in South Africa. You know, I won't go into the detail of who those are, but we've seen that, and we've seen how, you know, transformation and inclusion actually plays such a big impact in terms of leadership, that in South Africa, we really, you know, sort of, most of our companies are sort of stuck in this realm of, you know, transactional. You know, we've got BEE, which talks about transformation. We've got employment equity that talks about transformation. We've got the things that really, you know, want to move us in there. But it's, as companies, how receptive are we of this? And can we actually take that on and say, listen, we need to transform. You know, there's a lot of impacts and things that are going on this of transformation and women in leadership and you know, so forth. But many of our companies, you know, we're not sort of equipped. We're afraid to take that change and that challenge on to really transform.
Thank you. The other question that came up was, Given that there's a pressure to digitalize and digital expansion, is that a form of transformation? Maybe Taffy, that's your area.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting one, Prof, because what you will find is that, for example, there are people trying to sell you the latest and greatest technology out there. So yes, being able to transform your company to be digitally agile is a form of transformation. However, remember, this is not just bringing in technology. I think that's the important point. It's not saying now everybody works with laptops and now everybody's got these devices that works. It's digitally transforming an organization means you're taking your people with you. And taking your people with you means you're bringing in appropriate technology that solves the issues that they are having. So say, for example, you've got an issue with reporting, and it takes your finance team 10 days or 15 days for them to get the financials out. What you need to be looking at is how can you get technology in to automate some of those processes that are taking so long. That is digital transformation. So yes, it is a form, but remember, it's putting together the technology with the people, and it's solving something that is a bottleneck within the organization.
Yes, thank you. So I think you both of you made the point about the fact that you can be, you need to, and Bonsile and Nkumane asked the same question. Can you be both transactional and transformational? Maybe you just want to briefly respond to that.
Definitely, I think you can. I think as a leader, you also need to be able to know when you need to, use what hat. Like our previous comments, we said there is times where we are going to be transactional because there's a job to be done. But there is, times where you're going to need to be transformational, and you're going to need to be able to motivate your team, share that knowledge. And there's nothing stopping you from jumping in between to say, I'm leading my people, I'm sharing the vision, I'm sharing of how we're going to get there, but still managing the day-to-day transactional stuff of what needs to get done. I think, very briefly for time, I'll summarize that in a nutshell.
Thank you. So, Leslon Honolo Pizzo asks, in a repetitive functional environment, how much change or inspiration can you actually bring into that kind of manufacturing, a repetitive, totally functional environment? I mean, really, what can you change or inspire in that?
I think change is an ongoing process, and I hear, you saying that, we're in manufacturing, so all we're doing is just manufacturing, let's say soap or toothpaste or whatever the case may be.
Yes.
But I think, change is there, there's new machinery that comes to, there's new ways of producing, or, from a production perspective, there's new ways from a supply chain and operation side. So it's really about, do we want to change? Do we know what change is there? And how we, sort of receptive to this change. We always talk about this change curve, and I think we mentioned in one of our previous webinars of the COVID-19 change, sort of denial and all of those sorts of things. But I think change is there in any area that we have. I mean, look at COVID and how it actually changed so many industries that many of us didn't even know we could change. I mean, some of us didn't even know how to use Zoom before this, and here we are sitting in this webinar. So I think, change is there, and I think it's important that we embrace it and know if we want to change and we're open to it, then we will change.
Yes. So Fatima asks about, well, maybe at the top of an organization, there is a transformational element, or the CEO is a transformational leader. But how do you get it to filter down? I know it talks to culture of the organization and values in some ways, but are there any practical ways?
I think for me, like we mentioned, the first thing, it starts with the leader, and that is walking the talk and living the values that you espouse, and creating that within your circle of influence, and having your direct reports understanding what it is and what the end goal is. For me, that's the only way, that you can do that. Because as much as you may put, you can have all the other tools, the team building and going away for these retreats, but if people are not living that on a day-to-day basis, then it's going to be difficult for it to be sustainable.
Yes. Okay, so linked to that, Claudia said she realized that she used to work under transformational leader, and now she sees her leader as being transactional, and wondered, can you choose a leader in terms of perhaps at the point at being interviewed and asking, well, what kind of leader are you? I'm not sure if that was what she meant, but again, that it raises the question is, I mean, what can followers do to perhaps influence, and I use the word influence in inverted commas, their leaders to be more transformational?
I think I think coming back to how would you know if they're transformational? I think you really have to interview your leader instead of you going for their job interview, and really interview them to really ask questions to see what type of leader they are. But I think you can influence transactional leadership. It's really about being honest, asking the questions, and like we're saying, it starts with the leader, but it's also about that culture that's in there, having that culture, that openness to say, I'm doing my job, I know I'm getting paid to do this, but can I do a little bit more? And this is how it'll benefit as the leader, to sort of gauge that sort of leadership style and try to help them, to transform a little bit without being, leader. And it's about managing up, know what takes them, know what sort of floats their boat, all of those sorts of things.
Yes, thanks for that. Two questions came. One from Sipo talked about how does a leader measure the impact? What variables can be used? And Simpiwe wanted to know, is performance appraisal a tool used in transformational leadership?
I think it is used in sort of transformational leadership, but I think what elements, coming back, I think you said it was Simpiwe that asked that asked the question.
How do you measure impact? What kind of variables can you look at to say, well, I'm making an impact?
I think there's a few things, one can be, your 360 feedback surveys, staff review of managers, where you're getting your followers to actually review you and saying, what type of leader are you? What can you improve on? And getting that feedback and being receptive of it. That's one way of getting sort of feedback or ways. The other one, if you look at your employee turnover, they always say that people don't leave companies, they leave managers and leaders. So if your employee turnover is high in terms of your department, you should be asking yourself the question through exit interviews and stuff like that, is what am I doing that making my people want to run away from me? What can I do better to get them to stay? And I think, one of the things you touch on is performance appraisal. Again, it can be seen as a little bit transactional because you're getting paid to do this and you need to, move on. But that's where things like IDPs come into play, where we talk about growth plans and development plans and all of those sorts of things to really see how are you doing as a leader, and are you promoting other leaders? Are you, making other leaders, or are you just creating, a herd of followers, but you're not grooming and growing anyone from there?
Yes. So, Lazile had a question about that Ceridian case study. And her view is that she called it a sweetheart model.
Yeah.
And she wanted to know, is that kind of thing sustainable? Because we saw maybe what was the total opposite of Amazon.
I think it's definitely more sustainable on the employees than what we saw with Amazon. And the reason being, we're seeing how as we mentioned, the human capital sort of a field is changing, and where people are not so averse to changing jobs. And so creating that kind of environment makes you attractive to talent. And it's actually a way of retaining your skill, your talent. And if you have people like that and you're attracting new talent and you're keeping the old guys there, then that process takes care of itself. And that's where the renewal feeds itself from, and the sustainability. It's definitely better than a toxic environment or high pressured environment where people don't feel welcome and it's just a job, So I think that the answer to a question, I would say it is more sustainable, because I think you're going to get the best talent. You're going to get people with the potential to develop into great leaders, and people with, the desire to want to maintain that.
I think, if I can add on you, Taffy, you're talking about sustainability. We've got the actual sort of case study of how they transformed, and we'll share the link with everybody. But one of the important things that came out from here was that, after 18 months of this sort of change that they've had in the industry, their NPS score has actually increased by 25 points year on year. And they had a 70% growth rate on their flagship product, which became one of the fastest growing cloud companies in the market, which just talks, a little bit of, if we can talk about that sweetheart moment that she talks about, but how that really impacts the organization and how that makes the organization sustainable in terms of profit, revenue, the NPS score and all of those things, and really carries that organization forward.
So we've run 15 minutes over our time, so I'm going to leave the rest of the questions for tomorrow. But perhaps the last one that we can conclude with is the impact of that digital transformation. Willem wants to know on teamwork. Is there a link between the two?
I think you've got to, yes, there is a link. There is a link. It's definitely different from what we're accustomed to in terms of working. But for anyone who's worked in a technology company, you will find that it's very easy for people right across the world to be working on the same project. So software development, for example, is a very good example, where you will have developers in India, developers in America, and developers in South Africa, all working on the same project. So it's a skill that has to be learned. It's a skill that has to be learned. So we can't apply the same way we used to meet up, have a debrief, and talk about issues and face-to-face interaction. So the teamwork is slightly different now. It's remote, and managing remote teams is a skill that you have to learn.
Thank you for that. So I want to say thank you to everybody again, the participants, as well as the panelists. But perhaps we could just finish off with something here that Vernon has put on the chat line, and I really can't let it go. He says, most people live by the law of minimum effort. I think it's about, if you have that viewpoint, then that's how you're going to treat your employees. Okay, so perhaps you need to change that viewpoint and say, well, most people actually, the so-called theory Y approach, not only like to do work, but they'll take on responsibility. And maybe that's the kind of transformation that's required at other points as well. But thank you very much to Kyle and to Tafadzwa and the rest of the panelists. And for the participants, remember, session 3 tomorrow at the same time at 1900 hours or 7 o'clock. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
Prof.
Thank you.